As a heads up for people who are watching, this video will frankly discuss the results of people committing terrible deeds and how it affects their family members. Sexual assault and other topics will be mentioned. If this is the kind of content that causes you issues, please close or click on the first link I have in my notes. Tonight's video of kittens. It's so very nice. Can I just watch this instead of talking about this crap? Fine. We're going to talk about generational curses. Yippee.
So gender is just a social construct, and believing in God is a crutch. When you mix them together and give them a whirl, what do you got? Atheist-y girl!
Generational curses is one of the more obscure beliefs among fundamentalists, and it's not universally held among Christians. So let me first start off with a definition I've pulled directly from a fundamentalist site. A generational curse is basically a defilement that was passed down from one generation to another. For example, if your mother has been heavily involved in the occult, then she becomes quite defiled. That's a little rude. Polluted or unclean, and has opened herself up to various... I know they did not mean this as an innuendo, and has opened herself up to various demons to enter her. Don't laugh. The Bible tells us that the sin of the parents can cause the same pollution to be handed down to their children. There are a few places within the Bible that they're getting this teaching from. Lamentations 5:7 and Exodus 34:7. There is also an example that they will sometimes use with Abraham in Genesis 12:10 through 20, continued on to Genesis 20:1 through 16, and then continuing the story with his son Isaac in Genesis 26:1 through 33. In two different places in the Bible, the patriarch of the nation of Israel, Abraham, gets worried that his wife is too beautiful. So beautiful, in fact, that he's worried that if people find out that he's married to her, they'll kill him and take his wife. So he tells her, if anyone sort of gets risky with you or approaches you and asks if you're single, or if I'm your husband, tell him you're my sister. So she did this, and both times a leader in the land that he was staying in tried to take Sarah for his bride. Each time the deception was discovered and Sarah's returned. The first time was with the Pharaoh of Egypt, and the second was with Abimelech, king of Gerar. In the second case, Abraham is asked why he lied, and he says, well, she's the daughter of my father, but not the daughter of my mother, so it's not really a lie. First, ooh. Second, there's some Star Wars Obi-Wan truth-telling there. So, Bible continues in Genesis talking about Abraham, then it moves on to his son Isaac. And we find out that Isaac does the same thing. He moves to a new area and he gets worried that people are going to think his wife is really too pretty for him and kill him and take his wife. Was that a thing back then? Like how it's a thing today to go on OkCupid to get dates? Anyway, Abimelech, king of Gerar... Wait, am I mixing this? No, I'm not. This is the same man that his father Abraham pulled this on. Abimelech, who must now have a case of really bad blue balls, tries to marry Rachel, Isaac's wife, and again finds out she is already married and sends her back to Isaac. At this point, I think he's probably done with the line of Abraham and it's like, no more. They come around, I don't want to see any of the women around them. So, how would a rational person review this set of actions? Maybe they would think this is what happens when you have oral history passed down for a couple hundred years before it's written down. Sometimes embellishments, mistakes, and repetition are included in the oral history. Or if you are someone who takes the Bible as being full of good teachings through allegories, you might say this is in there 3 times to emphasize the importance of a lesson to be learned from it. Possibly why not to lie to people about your wife being your sister. Or maybe just lying in general. Or, if you're a fundamentalist who believes the Bible is 100% accurate, I'm looking at you, Kent Hovind. You tell your congregation that this is an example of generational curse or sin. The sins your parents will do will come up in your life. If you don't have God's help, you will make the same mistakes as they did. Now imagine you grew up in a church and you believed in this fundamentalist crap. No, I'm not going to be vague, and let's throw out the imagine and go for life. Growing up, I sucked at being a guy. I just didn't get it like the others, and so I just looked at my dad and tried to imitate him the best I could. To the point, the nicknames for me as a kid were Old Man, and after the Austin Powers movie came out, I was called my dad's mini-me. I grew up in a church that was very fundamentalist and believed the truth and application of every bit of the scripture. So we were taught about generational curses. And then one day, I learned the man that I had copied, the man who, because of God, I will have to face the same temptations as sin as him, so I believed. This man I loved was found to be a pedophile. I used to look like my dad, so much so that at one point I got childhood pictures of me and him mixed up, and the only way to tell the difference between the two was by how old the film stock was. And I now had to look at that face in the mirror every day. And I had this belief that at some point I was going to face the same temptations that he was. And I had a kid on the way. This, in case you haven't guessed, really fucked my brain up. And I know there are others out there that are among you who have had parents who were crap, who did bad things. And whether you're Christian or atheist, you've probably wondered if you're fated to do the same. Let's put aside the Christian horsepucky of belief for a moment and see what science has to say about this. Now, there's a couple qualifiers I need to talk about before I go into the actual science. The first thing is, I need to say the question as Christianity puts it is, will a child repeat their father's sins? And you cannot scientifically answer this because the term sin is unscientific and it's not a quantifiable thing. People don't spend years of their lives studying sin. Well, some pastors do, but they don't do it scientifically. So this video, I checked on research on two different lines of inquiry. The intergenerational transmission of criminal behavior and heredity of addiction. Both of these are studied fields and would generally fit into what a Christian might call sin. Second, the studies of criminal behavior was set in a light that behavior is bad no matter what. There is no measure in here as to whether the law breaking was for a just reason or if it was because the law was wrong. People stealing for food, people doing sex work, someone just taking a puff of marijuana is all considered criminal behavior in these studies. For the rest of the video, I will take for the argument's sake that this is the proper view. But personally, I believe the law needs to be less black and white, and know that when I talk about criminal behavior, I do not personally apply any condemnation towards everyone who has broken some of these laws. Kaboom, I've broken myself, so. Third, I'm going to make an assumption for this video. I believe most of my viewers are atheists who believed in a religion at some point or another, and then became atheist. This means you are willing to look at the data, and despite the terrible truth, that being that we're alone, and there's no afterlife for us, you accepted it. And I assume you will want the truth even if it's hard. The data does show that if your parents were criminal, or if they were addicts to a substance, you do have an increased risk of following them in their footsteps, especially when compared to people who had parents who weren't. Most of what I learned about the intergenerational transmission of criminal behavior came from a meta-analysis. titled A Systematic Review and Meta-Analysis of the Intergenerational Transmission of Criminal Behavior. I said that right the first time. Wow. It was published in a journal titled Aggression and Violent Behavior. For those of you who do not know what a systematic review or meta-analysis is, it's a study where the authors take other studies on one topic, then do a review and analysis to get a deep overview of what all the different research on that topic has taught us. I would suggest anyone who wants to learn more in this subject of criminal behavior and how it's passed on to start with this article. And if someone out there is smart enough to teach me all the math they're using here, call me. I need help. The research shows that if you have a parent who is involved in criminal behavior, you'll have an increased risk, up to twice as likely than someone whose parents have not committed crimes. The percentage of that risk will vary depending on the parent that was arrested, the age of the child, the gender of the child, and comparing that to the gender of the parent. They give 4 reasons they believe this is to be so, and they are: 1. Social learning. Parents through their actions teach their children how to commit crime. 2. Criminologic environmental influences. Basically, because people who offend often have other issues in their lives, they live in environments full of other people who offend because they can't get the best houses. They end up with drug addicts and other people living around them. And that's the kid's environment. And the kid grows up seeing everyone around him does the same thing and eventually fall into it themselves. 3. The official bias from criminal justice system. Courts often will be more punishing of people who already have relatives in the criminal justice system. They sometimes will look at someone and say, hey, his brother or father's in jail. He's just as bad as them. We're just going to give him the full sentence. Whereas if you were found doing something as a young kid, like graffiti, and your family had no criminal justice record, especially in the 70s and 80s, there's a possibility that that arrest would just sort of disappear and you would not have any record. And 4th, finally, biological or biosocial transmission. This is generally genetic issues like high testosterone and low resting heart rates. On the addiction side, again, there's some evidence that those with parents who are addicted to something will have children who are more likely to be addicted to something. The main article I based this research from is from the NCBI and is titled Genetic Basis of Addictive Disorders. They sum up the interrelationship of this passing of addiction as: peer influences and family environments are the most important for exposure and initial pattern of use, whereas genetic factors and psychopathological play a more salient role in the transition to problematic use. Translated into English, it means you're more likely to start using drugs if you have family members who are using it, or, get into gambling if your family members are into gambling. And you're more likely to get addicted to this stuff if your parents were addicted, passed on a genetic quirk that ends up with you having the same kind of addiction. So a summary: if your parents were criminals, if they were addicts, then you have an increased risk for both of these behaviors. But there is good news. And no, it's not that you can accept Jesus into your heart and be freed of the spirits that cause us. Yes, they believe that when you do these kind of things, demons will attack you and follow you, and then go into your children and follow them and cause them to do it. And growing up, I was told the only way out of this was prayer. Lots of prayer. But the good news is there is ways around this. First of all, note that I said there's an increased risk, not an absolute positive correlation that you will do the same things your parents did. There are plenty of people who do have parents who were addicts, parents who did terrible things, and they didn't follow in their footsteps, and you can be one of those. You're not doomed to follow your parents' steps, either because of spirit reasons or just because you grew up in that. And both of the studies I cited show that as time goes on, there's less and less chance of a person doing the same behavior as their parents. If your parents were a criminal and you don't follow their same behaviors, as you get older, you tend to build your own life and you don't fall into your parents' behaviors. You make your own mistakes to pass on to your children. And as you have parents who were addicts, or into gambling, there's paraphernalia and other behaviors that are around you when you're younger, and that's the big drive to get you into doing it yourself. But as you grow up and move off to your own house, you might not have that stuff there, and there's less of a risk of you starting. Please note that the genetic basis of addictive disorders does mention that the genetic factors for addiction stay with you even as you get older. So, if you had parents who are addicted to a substance, you will have throughout your life a higher risk of being addicted yourself because of genetics. And you might think you're safe by going with a different substance than your parents, but the studies do show that there is some codependency between different substances. So while their drug of choice may have been cocaine because they had a genetic disorder that allowed them to get more pleasure from that, you might have that same genetic disorder, but alcohol might start triggering it. So if you are someone who had a parent who was using illicit substances or gambling or video games to a point where it was an addiction, if you're planning on starting those stuff, be really careful. It doesn't necessarily again mean that you will get addicted, but it is an increased risk for you. So generally my videos are about atheism or trans people, and I did sort of tie this to atheism with the generational curse, saying that there are genetic reasons for what the church observed years ago. And I will point out, this is not a prediction by the Bible, as one article I found said. I found one article that was claiming that because there are generational things that can happen, and they used a study of epigenetics to prove that it does happen, they claimed that this meant that the Bible is correct. Whereas what was really happening is people see patterns and they come up with reasons for that patterns. Yes, they saw that some parents were alcoholics and their kids became alcoholics, and so they wrote that this could happen, and they gave it a mythical reason for happening. They didn't know that genes were in there. They just thought, oh look, this person's drunk, there must be some kind of evil spirit on him, and now his kid's drinking, he gave that spirit to his kid. And so there is some atheism in here, but mainly I looked into this for myself. 14 years ago when I had a kid, I was freaked out. I had no kind of urge like my father did, but I was terrified that it would happen to me. It hasn't. And it won't. And I'm sure there are some of you out there who need to hear this. You are not your parents. What your parents did, what they did to you, what they did to others, and you saw them do, where you grew up, that isn't you. You are your own special person. Yes, I'm starting to sound like a special snowflake. But it's true, you are your person. And no matter how much you acted like your parents, you looked like your parents, you do not have to do the same thing they did. I mean, for those of you who are atheists who grew up in Christian families, look at it. Your parents were Christian, Hindu, Buddhist, and you're free of that. You can also be free of the terrible things that they did that you don't want to do yourself. And you don't need a God to do it. Thank you everyone for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe and ding 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 that bell so you know when I put up a new video. I know this one was a bit of a downer, so there's another link below of something cute for you to watch, because it was a bit of a heavy subject to study, to write, and I imagine it might have been a little bit heavy to listen to. Please be sure when you comment to put lots of comments, because I like reading what y'all think and responding to it. The same rules apply. This is not a video about being trans. Any comments that are pointed towards calling me a man in a dress or making fun of trans people, I will delete, because we're talking about addictions and criminal behavior here, not trans people. And this is not the forum for that. Other comments I'm welcome to read. You can also find me on Twitter at atheist_t_girl. And I actually hope y'all all have a really great day.